I think it would look like corruption. I think especially given the Hunter Biden pardon already, it would be seen as one of a kind. It would be seen as a kind of that kind of pardon where it's politically motivated, designed to thwart investigations. But the deep irony is, in some ways, it'll make an investigation easier.
There are reports that President Biden is looking to preemptively pardon some people that Trump may try and prosecute. Is this constitutional, and has this happened before?
It is constitutional, and it has happened before, right? There are pardons in anticipation of potential prosecution. A good example of that would have been Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon. Nixon hadn't yet been charged in a criminal court. He'd been impeached, but he hadn't been charged in court itself. So that was a pardon that was sort of protective of Richard Nixon, and so this wouldn't be unprecedented. Also, Hunter Biden's pardon was in many ways preemptive because it didn't cover just the crimes that he had been convicted of. It covered all of his activity for an 11-year period, which would include plenty of activity that was never the subject of an indictment. So it is constitutional to do this. There's plenty of precedent for it. It's very brazen. And it's not common, I would say. It's more common to pardon people for crimes they've already been convicted of, but it's certainly not unheard of.
Do you think this would make the people who are being talked about, for example, Liz Cheney and others, look more guilty in the eyes of the public? If they're suddenly getting these pardons, then surely this suggests that they have done something wrong.
A little bit, certainly. It does. It suggests that they're trying to protect from a political prosecution. I think it also gives a lot of weight to many of the claims that the Trump legal team has been making for years now. I mean, throughout the discussion and the Supreme Court case about presidential immunity, one of the Department of Justice's big arguments is that there's no need to protect a president from unfair prosecution because the DOJ is so upstanding and there's so many safeguards that the odds of an unjust prosecution are very low, of weaponized prosecution are very low. And now that same administration is saying, well, we need to pardon all these people because, and have a really broad preemptive pardon because there's a potential for a weaponized justice system when our opponents take over, just so happens to be the same opponent that we attempted to jail for the rest of his life. So I think there's plenty to be said about the way that these pardons reflect both poorly on the people who might be receiving them and also reflect very poorly on the administration that is giving them.
When it comes to some of the names that have been floated in these preemptive pardons, I mentioned Liz Cheney, Adam Schiff, Anthony Fauci, do you think the Republicans have a legitimate legal gripe with these people? Do you think that there is legal concern that they may have done something wrong and they are worthy of at least investigation?
Certainly. I think first for Fauci, he has not been held accountable for funding gain-of-function research in China. A lot of people on the right often focus more on the vaccine and issues with that, but I think if there's criminal activity involves the potential, the funding of that research that ultimately is likely the cause of the pandemic that killed millions of people. And it's hard to actually think of a potentially greater crime or a greater wrong than what, that project, which did not need to be done. Nobody needed to be doing that research. Nobody needed to be experimenting with novel coronaviruses, creating new ones. So I think that's one instance. Adam Schiff has been conspiring against President Trump's rights for years now. I think there's actually a very good case to be made that he violated various congressional rules and maybe even committed crimes by disclosing information that was being discussed in sealed and private Senate hearings and private House hearings, rather, because he was in the House of Representatives. Liz Cheney, there's questions about, certainly she had violated her professional ethics when she talked with Cassidy Hutchinson, knowing that Cassidy Hutchinson was represented by counsel. In America, you're not allowed to do that. I don't know how it works in the United Kingdom, but in America, if you're a lawyer and you know that an adverse party is represented by another lawyer, you talk to that lawyer, you don't talk to the client. And if you do talk to the client, that's a violation of professional ethics and can get you disbarred. Certainly Liz Cheney did that. I think there's a potential that she could be seen as conspiring against President Trump's rights, that, there's other unethical behavior that might reach the level of criminality. And I think that all of them really are worthy of investigation.
You talked about Nixon. Do you think that if they did do these preemptive pardons, would this look like corruption?
I think it would look like corruption. I think especially given the Hunter Biden pardon already, it would be seen as one of a kind. It would be seen as a kind of that kind of pardon where it's politically motivated, designed to thwart investigations. But the deep irony is, in some ways, it'll make an investigation easier because in America we have the Fifth Amendment, which means that you can always have a privilege against testifying if you have a reasonable fear of self-incrimination. I don't know about the United Kingdom. Again, I'm not a UK legal expert, but that's how it works in America. And one of the only ways to defeat a Fifth Amendment claim is to immunize the person who's testifying from any potential criminal liability. And these pardons effectively do that. I mean, the Hunter Biden pardon says the guy is is pardoned for any federal crime he might have committed over a span of 11 years. Well, it's pretty reasonable to say that he doesn't have a reasonable fear of self-incrimination based on his testimony for any of his conduct over that 11-year period. So Congress could bring him in and demand that he testify. And if he refuses, he could be held in contempt.
You talk about one of the options the Republicans could use, or one of the levers to continue their investigations despite this pardon, specifically with Hunter Biden. Let's say that the Democrats, Biden, does issue a series of preemptive pardons to all of his political allies. What could the Republicans do in retaliation? Could they use state law? Is there any kind of legal maneuvers they could do to kind of get around this?
Well, I mean, it's possible that there's some state prosecutor, but they would need to have jurisdiction in many of these supposed crimes that are being committed in the District of Columbia, which is the only federal district. So a federal pardon basically immunizes you if it's broad enough from any of your conduct. If you were in the District of Columbia and it didn't have external impacts, it's unlikely that we would be able to defeat a pardon either by, first off, the pardon power is plenary. The president has the right to do it, and no court is going to overturn a pardon or find that it was improperly given, save for a very, very unbelievably clear case of bribery. So the real only way to get around, say Biden were to pardon every single person who the Republicans might think of investigating, you'd have to then, the only thing to really do then is just to do a congressional investigation for the purposes of figuring out legislation to deal with that in the future. Congress has a lot of leeway to bring people in to testify. And because, again, as I just said, if they're all immunized from criminal responsibility, then they can't claim any Fifth Amendment privilege, and so they can be compelled to testify. And failing to testify under those circumstances would be a new independent crime, which could be prosecuted independently of the pardon.
Some Republicans argue that they have to use the DOJ to investigate these people, to essentially teach them a lesson. You can't go around persecuting your political opponents using the Department of Justice in the way that you've done in the last 4 years. And we have to hold you account to that so that it doesn't happen again. If they do receive these pardons, do you worry that the politicization of the DOJ will simply continue or will happen again if the Democrats win next time?
I'm not sure. Because I think the likely response of the Trump administration, given that, would be to do something very similar at the very end of the Trump administration, which is, oh, you did this widespread, broad-based pardon of anybody we might think of investigating for wrongdoing during the previous term. We're going to do the exact same thing and just have, broad-based immunization of all major administration figures for the period of the 4-year period where Trump was president. I think that's the more likely outcome than a sort of tit-for-tat escalation at DOJ. I think that's it, assuming that Biden goes forward with a broad-based pardon for a number of people. I think that's the most likely outcome. But that also leads to these kind of bizarre events where at the end of I think that's just going to continue. I don't see a reason why it would stop. It would just continue into the future where every single administration, as one of its last acts, pardons a slew of major figures in the administration for any crimes they may have committed during the previous 4 years.
And what do you want to see from this new administration in terms of the DOJ, how it's run, and also the FBI? There's also, as I said, a lot of Republicans want the DOJ to be used to go after these people. So what do you want? What would you hope for from this new administration?
No, I want them to hold people accountable. And I want them to hold people accountable who were engaged in lawfare going the other direction. I think that it's important. If they are not pardoned, they should be investigated. Because it is true that in a world where only one side is willing to use lawfare, only one side is willing to weaponize the Justice Department, there's no reason to see why there would be a settlement. I mean, it's foundational game theory. If you're always willing to let yourself be exploited, you can't expect your opponents to cooperate. So you have to be willing to defect yourself if your opponents are going to defect first. And I think the ultimate goal you want to get to a world where nobody's weaponizing the justice system against each other, but there has to be some retribution. The Republican Party has to demonstrate that it is a force to be reckoned with, that it won't just passively roll over in the face of stuff like this. And I think that, I think I'm optimistic that will happen.
Thank you for watching this video. If you want to watch more content, please subscribe to our new GBN America YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.